Is it too late to give my thoughts on the Batman? Already one of 2022's biggest films, The Batman for many has toppled The Dark Knight and others to be crowned the best comic book movie of all time, and to some, this film has become their overall greatest film of all time. And there is some merit for why people would consider those two options, because even though I have a couple of problems with this film, what Matt Reeves and his creative team did on this movie is a technical masterpiece. Directing, cinematography and score. This movie is made by people at the highest level in their craft. And when I first watched The Batman, I did enjoy the movie. I liked the casting of Robert Pattinson, Zoe Kravitz, Dano and so many more. What Pattinson and Reeves created in The Batman is a hero that is learning on the job and figuring out who this Batman wants to be. Is it the vengeful shadow-lurking fear, or is it the hope that an unjust city can work together to create a better place? This Batman is still deciding that. He is still understanding the city of Gotham. This isn't a place that he has fully grasped. I think represented by the fact that we don't get to explore a lot of Gotham. Batman usually stays in the same locations. Bruce Wayne is the exact same as Batman, and what I mean from that is there is no personality difference. And this is clear by the way Pattinson plays Bruce. Bruce has not defined these two characters, so he plays them the same. And at first, I wasn't keen on that. The more I think about that portrayal, the more I like it. This leaves Bruce Wayne, the character, to grow a lot more. At this point, he is cold and methodical, not the playboy narcissist that everyone around him assumes him to be. But instead, Bruce and Batman are the exact same. However, this does leave an issue, which is because Bruce and Batman are played the same way, both characters feel very distant. Sure, this makes sense for Batman because he is supposed to be, lurking in the shadows and always being very tactical, but because Bruce and Batman are played that way, Bruce nor Batman are characters we can really connect with. His story does not feel like it is told to be emotional but more straight to the point, and that leaves this movie with a big problem. If the main character is not someone we can emotionally connect to through his story, especially when his story plays halfway through his development, in the sense that we do not see Bruce Wayne grow into becoming Batman, so we don't see the struggle he goes through, and even though we see a little bit of the learning process in this movie, Batman is a character that is already halfway through his development. It leaves this movie with a huge headache because who is the character we get to connect through? Because if there is no one, then there comes a point in this 2-hour 50-minute movie where I ask the question, why should I continue to care? And that was the problem I had with the story of the Batman. Why should I care for any of the characters if there aren't any emotions I can attach myself to? This was a question that was on my mind after the first time I watched the Batman. Then I watched it a second time about a week later, and I figured out why this movie felt so cold and detached from the audience and essentially soulless. The reason is the character of the Riddler. A character that should have been the bridge to connect the audience emotionally to this story. And this could have been done by making us, the audience, decide whether the Riddler was right to be mad at Bruce Wayne. Here's my issue with this interpretation of the Riddler. He's too generic. He's a faceless character for most of the movie and has a boring backstory. The Riddler was an orphan that felt the injustice of the elites and more specifically the Waynes. He did not like that after the Waynes died, Bruce Wayne, the billionaire who had a mansion, was the one the media felt sorry for, but himself and the other orphans he was forced to live with in these small rooms were forgotten about. Typified by how the orphanage never got the funding and instead was distributed to wealthy politicians and corrupt police force. Overall, that is a good basis for a backstory, but should not have been the whole backstory, because it's too broad of a story. What we needed was a more specific reason why the Riddler was outraged at Bruce Wayne, because him being angry at the rich kid was not enough for me to care as I should have. Sure, I cared about the orphan children not getting funding, but it wasn't a backstory that made me invested in the rage the Riddler felt. But here's the frustrating thing about the Riddler's story. It was set up in a way that one change makes the Riddler a far more fascinating villain and counterpart to this version of Bruce Wayne. This film makes a big deal about a journalist that had a bit of dirt on Martha Wayne, and because Thomas Wayne wanted to protect his wife, he enlisted the help of crime boss Falcone. Falcone then did what crime bosses do, and to shut the journalist up, he got him killed. And this was a big revelation in the movie. However, after that was revealed, the journalist was not important anymore. Instead, the film goes in the direction of having Bruce mope around thinking his dad was a corrupt person, which was then resolved moments later when Alfred tells Bruce that it was Falcone who did it. And that build up to that revelation of this journalist became pointless. But here's one change this movie could have made that would have brought an emotional dilemma in the movie and to the audience. You make the journalist the father to the Riddler. So instead of the Riddler being angry at Bruce Wayne because the people gave him sympathy instead of himself, you have the Riddler angry for the fact that no one cared about him even though his dad was killed by Thomas Wayne, panicking. So you have the Riddler taking out the corrupt politicians for stealing the money that was supposed to go to the orphans, and at the same time exposing the Waynes for killing his father. I know the Waynes didn't kill the journalist, but for this story, in the Riddler's mind they did, or was a big part of why his father was killed. Just like the movie, the Batman gets this information and now has to deal with the fact that he's facing a vengeful man who just wants revenge for his father's death. And through that, Batman learns, similar to the movie, that he no longer wants to inspire vengeance, but hope. But instead of getting to that lesson through a cold and detached way, we see it through two characters who both lost parents and both go about making sure their parents did not die in vain in similar but yet very different ways. And there's the emotions that the movie missed out on. That slight change gives us the audience an emotional dilemma because we understand the hatred that Riddler has, but in the end, just like Batman, we know that hope is better than vengeance. So that's why the Batman feels soulless. It did everything else right except the most important part to any movie, and that is story and emotions. But riddle me this: what's cold but warm, far away but so close, and beautiful yet violent? You decide.